It's right on 7:30, and I'm just really mindful that people do have to get to classes. I know we'll have people jumping on, but just out of respect to everyone who's already on, we're going to jump straight into it today. So my name's Lee. I'm from the Barwon Adolescent Task Force, and along with Kylie Fox and Naomi Madigan, we've been really pleased to present the 4 BATPack PDs and hope to be doing this again next year. Today we've got Zoe Dent from WHR joining us. Zoe's been with us before. Some of you may have seen Zoe present before, and we're slowly picking up from our feedback what you want to know more about, which is what today's focus is on. I'm going to let Zoe do acknowledgement. I'm actually up on Darrabul country, but I'm going to let Zoe do acknowledgement as part of her presentation. Before I begin, though, as you jump on, can you please write the name of your school or where you're from and the number of people you've got joining you on screen today? If you've got questions, please throw them in the chat. We'll try and watch that as quick as we can. And during this session, there are some QR points during it. Don't worry about those too much. When we send out the slideshow, that's an opportunity for you to fill that in. And Zoe's offered to put together a big spreadsheet of what people's responses are, which gives us opportunities to do some further learning. So, Zoe, off you go.
Thanks, Lee. I guess following on from Dr. Connie's presentation, this one is really all about neuroaffirming practices, meaning that we are catering to the needs of all learners, not just one specific style. So in saying that, I'll get started. As Lee said, my name's Zoe Dent, and I'm a senior occupational therapist at WHR Allied Health. And today we're going to be looking at sensory processing and its impact on behaviours in the classroom. And to do this, we're going to look at what's changed for the learners of today compared to generations past. So I really hope that each of you will be able to come out of this with a greater understanding of the complex relationship between sensory processing and learning, and also some strategies to use in supporting the learners in your classroom. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land in which I'm recording this from today, which is on Wathaurong country, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. I also acknowledge my gratitude that we share this land today, my sorrow for some of the costs of that sharing, and my hope and belief that we can move to a place of equity, justice, and partnership together. I'll start by noting the language I'm using today. So for the purpose of the presentation, I'm going to be speaking in general terms about neurodiversity. Each individual will have their own preferences on how these terms are used in relation to themselves. So some people will probably prefer more of a person-first approach, such as I'm someone who is living with ADHD, autism, or neurodiversity, while others might prefer to identify with their diagnosis, such as I am autistic or I am neurodivergent. And it's our opinion and preference that each person is able to use the language that best suits themselves. I thought I'd just share this because one of my teacher friends sent it to me the other day and it made me laugh. So I'm just going to put this here. I'm thinking that if you've risen early specifically to watch this presentation, then you're already pretty eager to learn. But I do hope that everyone has is able to take away some strategies that they can use right after the presentation. So as Lee mentioned, we're going to be using QR codes throughout today's presentation, and it's going to take you to a spreadsheet. There's about, I think, 7 or 8 questions throughout, more towards part 2. And so I'm going to collate all of the strategies that we come up with. I'll put mine in as well as all of yours that you enter, and I'll send it to Lee, and Lee will be able to disseminate those answers so that we all have this list of strategies that we can build on. We're going to start by touching on neurological development because this is going to set us up for understanding sensory processing. And in doing that, we'll look at the learning brain and the surviving brain and how they might appear in the classroom. And then the rest of the presentation will be broken into 2 different parts. Part 1 is all about what has changed. So in this part, we'll explore our nervous system and what affects our ability to learn and to think clearly. We'll look at sensory processing, what it is and how it affects our nervous system. And we'll also be going to address what has changed for today's learners compared to 30 years ago. Once we've covered this, we'll look at part 2, which is what needs to change to be able to support the students of today. And as I said before, I'd like everyone to be able to come out of this part with at least 3 strategies they can make today to support the learners in their classroom. You are teaching children and young people throughout a developmentally sensitive period in their life. So from the time they come to school until the moment they finish, the brain is still developing. It's important to remember this when you're facing challenging behaviours in the classroom. The brain grows through experience. So the more experience a child has had at being co-regulated by attuned and responsive caregivers, the more likely it is that that child can demonstrate self-regulatory skills. But this is different depending on different situations. So different situations will evoke different emotions in every student. I'd like you to think about your students and the experience that they might have had in their lives. And these are tiny pieces to the big puzzle in being able to understand their nervous system. I'm just going to stop there and ask, just get everyone to check if they've put themselves on mute, just because I'm getting a little bit of feedback coming through. So just take a moment to do that. In times of dysregulation, it's really helpful to remember what's happening in the brain. So the brain develops from the bottom up, back to front, and right to left. And this means that our survival and our threat response systems are the first to develop, and those higher order processes, such as thinking, reasoning, impulse control, and empathy, they're all the last to develop and are not fully developed until they're about 25 years of age. So to simplify, this means that we have a survival brain and a learning brain. When we register a threat, either consciously or subconsciously, our survival brain will hijack our learning brain in order to service our survival. And it's just the brain doing what it's designed to do, which is to prioritize survival at all costs. When we're dysregulated, we're in our survival brain. And on the slide, you'll see how this might appear in the classroom. Being comfortable to use a range of regulatory skills in your classroom can keep students in their learning brain throughout a lesson. They can be quick and simple, and the more exposure the students have to them when they're in their learning brain, so when they're calm and connected, the more likely they will be to use them when they're dysregulated. When you're noticing students starting to present in these ways, the quickest way to get them back into their learning brain is through connection and co-regulation. And you can achieve this through a number of ways, but today we're going to focus on using our sensory systems. Connection through movement is generally the fastest way to bring kids back into their bodies, but because I said earlier, every nervous system is different and some kids won't want to do this. So it's important to have a few different strategies up your sleeve. When students are regulated in the classroom, they're going to look calm, connected with the teacher and their peers. They'll be able to empathise, they'll be able to reason, problem solve, they'll be more aware, and they'll usually have more of an alert, upright posture and be able to engage in eye contact, usually. But because we're all neuroaffirming, we'll know that some kids are going to look a little bit different. Not everyone looks the same when we show different emotions, as Connie so eloquently put in her presentation. And so when kids are starting to show some of these different body clues, we'll know that they're in their learning brain and that they are able to connect. Brain health is a leading cause of concern for many physicians and psychiatrists around the world at the moment. Dr. Austin Perlmutter, a physician in the USA, actually believes it's the most important issue facing humans in the current environment. And I'm not sure if you've heard of Dr. Daniel Amen, but he's an outspoken psychiatrist, also from the USA, and he's also echoing these sentiments. And closer to home, I can confirm that we're seeing more and more issues coming into our clinics in Victoria and New South Wales, all having impacts from brain health from these triggers. These brain health factors all have a direct impact on our ability to think, feel, and behave, and they'll certainly impact on our ability to learn. I acknowledge that looking at this slide, you might think, I don't have any control over these factors, but I'd like you to keep these in mind when working with challenging behaviours. And kids aren't trying to be bad, as we know. They've just got a lot going on in their brains. So when parents come to you looking for answers, I encourage you all to get really curious about what might be at work. And perhaps these prompts might be helpful for the parents to consider. Everybody's nutritional needs will be slightly different based on our genetics, our environment, and exposure to stress and activity. And I'm not going to sit here and recommend what people eat and what to avoid, but I would like to highlight the changes in food over the last 30 years. We're seeing more highly processed, high palatable foods making their way into lunchboxes more regularly. And they're often more convenient to suit our fast-paced lives. They might have different ingredients, chemicals, and nutritional values than food did 30 years ago. And these changes to food that young people are exposed to will have an impact on their brain health and their ability to concentrate. Our need for sleep hasn't changed. It's still the biggest factor in our ability to regulate our nervous system. And I know that we can all probably relate to that feeling of being really tired, having a bad night's sleep, and also having a short fuse and not being able to concentrate. And although our need for sleep hasn't changed, we're finding that young people's ability to get the required amount of sleep has changed. And one of the most common areas that we'll start on in OT is sleep hygiene to address ADHD symptoms. Some families will find that the hyperactivity symptoms of ADHD no longer exist once their child is able to get the required amount of sleep. A young person's sleep is being impacted upon by the use of screens, by social media, anxiety, busy, overcrowded schedules, and not being able to switch off at night, foods and drinks consumed throughout the day, as well as their room setup and the environment that they're sleeping in. And all of this can contribute to restlessness and insomnia in young people, and this will have an impact on the child's ability to think, learn, and behave in the classroom. It's important that a young person is able to move their body and get their heart rate up for periods throughout the day. And obviously, this is not new science. We know that activity is good for the brain. But for optimum brain health, a person should aim to get their heart rate up above resting for at least 30 consecutive minutes. So not the spikes, but a maintained 30 consecutive minutes a day. And these requirements differ for different stages of our lives, but for kids, it's really important and will have a huge impact on their ability to concentrate in the classroom. And we're seeing more sedentary lifestyles at a younger age than we did 30 years ago, which is due not only to lifestyle factors and screens, but also to the environments that we're raised in. Sensory processing is another area that will affect our ability to think and learn clearly. We're going to break this component down a little bit more over the next hour or so, but for now, let's think about sensory overload or overstimulation and how it might appear in the classroom. It could look like a total shutdown where the child is completely blocked off from their environment. It might look like dissociating, or it could look like hypervigilance where the child's looking around a lot, eyes wide and hyper alert. And in these states, we know the child is not in their learning brain. They're focused on threat detection and they're looking for cues of safety in their environment. The reason we're seeing more sensory issues come up for kids now than 30 years ago is for a number of reasons. Firstly, we're better able to identify it due to assessment and education, but also we're seeing higher rates of neurodivergent kids than we did 30 years ago. Sensory processing challenges is a common side effect of neurodivergence. And when we concentrate, so when all of us concentrate, the blood rushes to our prefrontal cortex to help us access problem solving, language, analytics, attention, whatever we need. When a child with ADHD is in a situation where they're required to concentrate on something that they're not intrinsically motivated to concentrate on, the blood will rush away from their prefrontal cortex, so in the opposite direction to what we want. And we often see the child with ADHD losing the ability to regulate, problem solve, and attend. Interestingly, the thalamus that controls our sensory processing is located near the prefrontal cortex, and it's like the gatekeeper. for the brain, prioritising which sensory information to let in to keep the nervous system stable and regulated. Now, when the blood rushes away from the prefrontal cortex, it also rushes away from the thalamus, meaning that we lose the ability to control the sensory information. So the gatekeeper is no longer working, the floodgates open and we're flooded with sensory information, or we shut down and stop all information from coming in. Trauma and hormones are another two factors that will affect our ability to think and access our learning brains. An individual's past experiences of trauma will also affect their ability to learn in the classroom environment. And this will affect our attention and focus, our emotional regulation, and our memory and retention. It will also have an impact on the individual's ability to socialise and moderate behaviour to suit the environment. We see young people with a history of trauma having a heightened stress response, and this will limit their ability to stay in their learning brain. Trauma also has a negative impact on motivation and self-esteem, and also on sensory processing. Trauma rates in young people have seen a significant rise over the last 30 years. In Australia, over 40% of adults have reported experiencing at least one traumatic event before the age of 17, with the most common being exposed to domestic violence or physical or sexual abuse. Now, this can double an individual's chance of developing a mental health condition such as anxiety, depression, or post-traumatic stress disorder. The Adverse Child Experience study found that children with a higher ACE score, so those that have experienced multiple adversities, are 32 times more likely to be diagnosed with behavioural or learning disorders. Hormonal changes can disrupt emotional regulation, sleep, attention, and memory, all of which will have an impact on our ability to learn in a classroom setting. We know that hormones like cortisol, which is the stress hormone, and serotonin, which is the mood-regulating hormone, will fluctuate during the school-aged years and will have a massive impact on stress and anxiety, and will impact on concentration and memory, affecting school performance. Hormonal changes during adolescence will shift circadian rhythms and affect sleep. Hormones like estrogen and testosterone are also linked to the development of the prefrontal cortex, so will affect our abstract thinking and planning and sustained attention. What you might not be aware of, however, is that our environment, our sleep, what we eat and drink and what we're putting in our bodies, how we're moving our bodies, and what activity and stress we're exposed to is directly related to the ability to maintain a healthy number of neurotransmitters in our brain. Neurotransmitters are the little chemical messengers that travel across the neural pathways in our brain. They relay communication between brain and different parts of the body and control a wide range of functions such as mood, cognition, and movement. Our neurotransmitters are directly impacted upon by our brain health, so our exercise, sleep, mindfulness, healthy eating habits. And as we've seen changes in these over the last 30 years, we can also expect changes have been made to our ability to maintain a healthy number of neurotransmitters. And this will affect how we think, feel, behave, and learn. All right, quick movement break. So I want everyone we're going to do this a couple of times because this in itself is a good strategy. Everyone stand up if you can, take a deep breath in, reach all the way to the roof, and then bend down, touch your toes. Take a deep breath here. And now I want you to swing your arms around like this with your head hanging. Another deep breath in, arms up to the roof. Clap 3 times. Sit back down. Oh, everyone looks like they've got a much better posture now. Thank you. That woke me up too. Okay, so sensory processing is the registration and interpretation of sensory input in the environment. It's the way our brains receive, organise, and respond to sensory information in order to react in a meaningful and consistent way. So our brain takes in information from our 8 sensory systems. The 5 common ones that we all know are sight, sound, touch, taste, and smell. And we're just going to start with those and have a look how they've changed over the last few decades. So with our vision, we have our focal acuity, which is what is commonly assessed when we're having an eye test. But we also have our peripheral vision, which is the ability to see objects and movements out of our direct line of sight. So just at the edges of our peripheral field. Our peripheral vision helps to detect motion and provide spatial awareness and a sense of what's coming, allowing you to navigate your environment without constantly needing to shift your gaze. Challenges with peripheral vision can lead to increased anxiety, motion sickness, poor spatial awareness, attentional issues, and balance issues. And we're noticing a change in how we're using our eyes these days compared to generations past. Our eyesight is changing based on our changing environments. So less time outside, less time in wide open areas, more time inside, more time in books and screens and looking at detail close up compared to far away. And this means a reduction in the emphasis on our peripheral vision and more focused emphasis on our focal acuity. This will have an impact on our sensory processing, so our other sensory systems, as well as the development of neural pathways in our brain. And as a result, we've seen a significant rise in the rates of myopia in children, so that's short-sightedness. Interestingly, visual processing challenges can look very similar to ADHD, so keep this in mind. Changes to auditory processing has been due to increased noise exposure, changes in technology, and evolving environmental conditions. The rise in exposure to noise can lead to auditory fatigue, impairments in processing sound clearly, including distinguishing speech in noisy environments. We see kids multitasking across auditory and visual stimuli, so using headphones and an iPad or headphones while they're working, which can affect the way our brains process sound and can reduce our attention spans for auditory tasks, such as sitting in a classroom and listening to a teacher. Tactile processing has also shifted over the past 30 years or so due to changes in technology, more screen time, and environmental factors. With the rise of digital devices and screens, kids are spending more time on tech and less time engaging in physical play that stimulate tactile processing, so different sensations, textures, holding objects in their hands, outdoor activities such as climbing trees and things like that. And this reduction in exposure can lead to hypo and hypersensitivity to tactile stimulation. Additionally, a rise in neurodiversity and sensory processing disorder will have an impact on tactile processing. Some modern learning environments will emphasize sensory diversity. However, some traditional tactile learning experiences like crafting or physical exploration, so getting messy, might be reduced in favor of screen-based learning. And these changes will affect our fine motor skill development, our attention and comfort, and our ability to engage in the learning materials.
Zoe, can I just reinforce that we ask a question in our workshops about what's something people don't like the feel of? And 5 years ago, nobody ever said paper or the feeling of your hand moving on paper when you write. In the last 2 years, it comes up in nearly every single year 4 through to year 8 session that they don't like the feeling of some books or some paper.
Wow.
And we've seen and I know Holly's nodding, but we've actually seen a really big increase in the number of kids who are responding to they actually don't like that touch.
Yeah, and we're seeing it more and more in our clinic too.
Yeah.
People coming in with tactile sensitivities. And similarly, those kids that crave, like they're just trying to surround themselves with the scratchy feeling as well. So yeah, it works both ways. But no, thanks for pointing that out, Lee, because paper does have a specific texture that will be triggering for some kids. So smell, while the fundamental mechanisms for smell processing haven't changed, our environmental and societal shifts have influenced how students will experience and process olfactory sensations. There's been a notable increase in environmental pollutants, which can impair the ability to process smell, and increased indoor time, as we said before, as well as increases in sensory disorders, and they'll all impact on the classroom environment. Our understanding of taste processing has also evolved due to scientific advances and changes in diet and environmental factors. And as I said before, we're seeing more and more high processed, high palatable foods in our diet. And that can change what our taste buds are detecting in food. So if we eat a lot of salty foods, that will dampen down salty taste buds. So we'll need more salt to satisfy that craving. So it does change the way we what we're wanting in our diets too. Our lesser-known sensory systems of vestibular processing or balance, proprioception, which is movement and pressure, and interoception, which is our inside environment, have also changed, and these are arguably the most impactful on classroom learning. The vestibular system helps us to understand the position of our head and body in space, and it gives us information about which way is up and which direction we're travelling in. It helps with balance, spatial awareness, and maintaining a stable visual image, even when we're in motion. It's like a movement detection system that consists of gravity receptors in our inner ear that inform us about rotary, so rotary movement, as well as linear movement. The vestibular system is really critical for survival, for us to be able to engage in our activities of daily living. So we often see vestibular deficits in kids with delayed motor development, perceptual and attentional deficits, learning disabilities, emotional regulation challenges, language disorders, and autism. Due to the rise of screen time, indoor and sedentary lifestyles, we're seeing changes in vestibular processing. So children of today experience less natural vestibular stimulation, less bouncing, hopping, jumping, running, climbing, swinging, rolling, twirling, less physical play. And these kids might seek out fidget toys. They're the kids that will become restless in class. They might have difficulty following instructions in the classroom. An underdeveloped vestibular system can lead to changes in focus, attention, posture, and coordination, as well as behavioural and emotional regulation challenges. So every time a child has to look at the blackboard or the whiteboard and then look back down at their paper, so doing this movement, they're relying on their vestibular system and their visual system to work together. Every time a child hears a noise in their peripheral auditory processing, they'll have to turn their head to locate the source of that noise. They're relying on their vestibular system working with their auditory system. Now, if any one of these systems isn't working effectively, it'll impact on their ability to regulate and access their learning brain. The proprioceptive system talks to the vestibular system to help your body understand where it is in space and how it moves. The proprioceptive system sends signals to your muscles and joints from your muscles and joints to your brain, letting you know if you're standing, sitting, moving, even when your eyes are closed. So we'll just do a quick little experiment. If everyone closes their eyes and holds the peace sign up behind their head, and with the other, I've got balloons coming up, and with the other hand, maybe hold 3 fingers up outside of your line of sight. Now, you can do this because your proprioceptors in your muscles and tendons are communicating to your brain to tell you where they are in space. And sometimes I'll check kids' proprioception by getting them to do this movement behind their back or on their lap without looking. If they have to look down, they're relying on their vision instead of their proprioception. So all of these movements are because of these little receptors that we have in our muscle body, in our tendons, and in our fascia called proprioceptors. They're all responsible for detecting different sensations: stretching, pulling, pressure, and vibration. And all of these sensations are because of proprioception. This system is key for balance, coordination, and motor control. So helping you to do things like walk, hold objects in your hand, use a pen to write. And it also helps you to coordinate your arm movements so that you know the exact amount of force to apply when you close a door, or throw a ball, or give a high five. I think we all know kids who struggle with proprioception. They might be those kids that seem to have really heavy feet and walk loud. They're the kids that'll get into people's personal space. They might appear a little bit uncoordinated or clumsy. They might struggle with sports or handwriting, or appear dysregulated in the classroom. Like the other systems, proprioception has been impacted upon by the use of screens and sedentary lifestyles. We're also far more controlled with our physical contact between kids, and this means that there's less opportunity for rough and tumble play and deep pressure. I often recommend these kids participate in sports like jiu-jitsu and self-defense, as there's more of an opportunity for touch and pressure. Changes to our environment, such as structured play versus free play, means that there's less opportunity to challenge proprioception, such as climbing a tree or roughhousing. And missing out on these opportunities can hinder our body awareness and our coordination. We're increasingly monitoring safety concerns and restrictions, which is usually warranted, I will add, but this comes as a cost. So young people might have fewer opportunities to engage in high-intensity physical activities that stimulate proprioception, such as jumping, falling, and wrestling. Proprioception is a sensory system that we can use to regulate every nervous system. So it's just a little gold one. If you take nothing away, just remember proprioception is the sensory system that even if we're flat and feeling bored, it will bring our optimum level of arousal up. So bring us into that optimum level of arousal. And if we're overstimulated or excited, it'll bring us down into that nice little spot where we can access our learning brains. Interoception is a sense just like smell, sight, sound, taste, touch, vestibular, and processing. It's the newest one added in. If you haven't heard of it, don't worry. Interoception allows us to notice our internal body signals, such as I've got a sore tummy, a racing heart, a full bladder, I've got a headache. And when we notice these body signals, our brain then uses them to connect this sensation to an emotion. So having an awareness of our body signals allows us to identify actions and strategies that will help us to regulate our emotions and our bodily functions. Like our other sensory systems, interoceptive awareness has been influenced by overcrowding of schedules, the increased use of screens, as well as an overstimulated day-to-day environment that kids have now that they probably didn't have 30 years ago. The use of headphones, visual stimulation, and daily commitments means that the brain is never bored or still. There's no space for young people to stop and notice sensations and emotions. And we often hear of kids lying awake in bed at night as it's the first time they've had to be able to sit still and focus inwards. This is when we're seeing them start to process all the things that have happened in their day and how they're feeling about them. In OT, we spend a great deal of time linking our body sensations or our body cues or our homeostatic emotions, like I feel tired, hungry, thirsty, or in pain, to our affective emotions, such as I feel happy, sad, jealous, excited, disappointed, hurt, angry. And interoceptive awareness is a skill that we can build on with practice. In the classroom, we often see dysregulation occur as a result of lack of interoception. So kids becoming angry and having meltdowns, and then we later learn that they might have not had anything to eat or drink at recess and lunch, or kids becoming dysregulated when they're sitting in a hot room on a 30-degree day with their jumper on and they haven't registered that they're feeling hot. Kids might be lashing out at teachers or other students when a young person hasn't registered that they're in pain, or they might have a headache, or that they're sad about something that might have happened at lunchtime. A lack of interoception will affect a young person from being able to access their learning brain and stay in a calm and connected, regulated state. So the way we process sensory information has changed compared to 30 years ago. And this is because the information that we're processing has changed, and that has impacted on our brain's ability to integrate this information. And with this in mind, we can't expect the same teaching methods and environments to work in the same way that they might have worked 30 years ago. We need to adapt. We need to evolve. Another movement break now that you know everything about the sensory system. This one is called Shake It Off. So we stand up and we're going to focus on the soles of our feet. And we're just going to rock back and forwards on our heels and our toes. And if you can really think about where you can feel that sensation, you're feeling stretching and pressure because of your proprioceptive system. So now we're going to bounce on our toes a little bit, swing our arms around, trying to get my body in. We might do this. This brings in our vestibular system, our rotary receptors, so all the semicircular canals in our inner ear. And then we're going to bang on our chest a little bit, which brings in vibration, which is one specific proprioreceptor called the Pacinian receptor. And then if you make a noise, that adds in a little bit of our vagus nerve there to really calm us down. Take a deep breath in. Clap 3 times really hard. Sorry for the noise, everyone. That woke me up. Thank you very much. Okay, so Jonathan Haidt is an American psychologist that you might have heard of. He's spent a lot of time investigating why we're seeing such a sharp rise in mental illness in young people around the world. And he attributes this to two main reasons. The first reason is the decline of play-based childhood, which began in the 80s and accelerated into the 90s. And he believes that all mammals need free play to wire their brains through development and childhood and prepare them for adulthood. But as a society, we're reducing children's access to unsupervised outdoor free play. The second one is, surprise, surprise, the use of screens and smartphones. And as you can see from the graph, since 2010, when we changed from mobile phones to smartphones, we've seen a sudden rise in mental illness. And it might have taken about 2 years for this to filter into most of our homes and our families. But as you can see from the graph, after that, the stats are very conclusive. The rise hasn't only affected young people. However, due to the introduction of this technology during brain development, they've been affected far worse than adults at the same time. Okay, so now let's look at how the sensory systems work together to impact on regulation. Apologies to those that have heard me talk about this before, but I've got this little jar here and it's filled with colourful blocks. So these blocks, or I'm actually using pen grips, but you could just imagine they're Lego, let's say. These different colours represent our 8 sensory systems. And this information could be, like the purple one might be tactile stimulation, the green one might be vestibular, red proprioception, blah, blah, blah. And this means this bottom line here is the point at which our brains wake up and start paying attention, because we need some information to get our brains moving in the morning. When we keep adding lots and lots of sensory information or Lego blocks, we will reach the top line, which is our neurological threshold and the point at which our brain might become overwhelmed. And this is when we need to say, stop, this is way too much stimulation, I'm starting to feel uncomfortable. If you keep putting sensory information in, the nervous system will become overwhelmed and we'll have a meltdown. We might enter fight or flight mode and we'll access our survival brain. Now, our jar isn't just about taking in sensory information. We can also take out some of the blocks when we do regulation strategies that calm the nervous system. So this might be by putting on noise-cancelling headphones, accessing a calm space in the room, or going for a walk, or going to a quiet, dark space, moving our bodies. They're all different types of regulatory activities for different nervous systems. These activities will help keep that Lego below that line of overwhelm and also allow us to stay in our optimum level of arousal, which is in that beautiful middle part there, which is where we need to be for learning and connecting. Now, for kids with sensory processing challenges, it might be a little bit different. So let's say the blue blocks represent noise or auditory stimulation. If we're in a really noisy classroom, for most kids, it might add about 3 blocks, right? But for kids who are sensory missers or with low registration, it's only going to add like 1 block or maybe 2. And for kids who are sensory sensitive, it might add like 5 or 6 blocks to the jar. So you can see how it's a bit different for everyone. It's important to remember that every child has a different profile. So while they might be sensitive for some information, say auditory processing, they might have a really high tolerance for visual processing, and another child might be the absolute opposite. So really low for visual processing, really high for auditory. That's why we always say to include a lot of different sensory experiences for kids in the classroom to try and spread it out and cater for all of the needs. To understand how a young person will process their sensory information, OTs will often do a sensory profile, which is just a tool that helps parents and teachers to understand how a child is taking in information and what their preferences are. And this can be really helpful to help regulate and monitor behaviour and keep people in that optimum level of arousal during their day-to-day tasks. In Australia, it's estimated that 1 in 8 people are neurodiverse. So this includes people living with autism, ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, Tourette's, and other learning or developmental differences. These conditions focus on innate differences in cognitive functioning and processing. excuse me. Although there's a difference between being neurodivergent and having a mental illness, people who are neurodivergent are more likely to also experience a mental illness such as anxiety, situational mutism, and depression. Neurodivergent people often have a different way of thinking. It's not a better way or a worse way, it's just different. And these conditions bring so much new perspective and potential to the world that we're living in. I'm thinking that most of you will know a lot about autism, ADHD, and dyslexia, so I won't go into them, but if you'd like more information on these, please reach out.
And Zoe, we've put under BATPack 4 on the School's Wellbeing Hub, we've put some links to further information about this to back up Zoe's comment.
Unreal.
We'll send
Yep.
you a link to that, so that's already been done.
Thanks, Lee.
No worries.
I will touch on another two that we're seeing come into the clinic a lot. So the first one's dysgraphia, and it's a learning disability that affects our writing skills. Later on, we've got some case studies that we're going to go through, but this one often coexists with dyslexia or ADHD. But it doesn't have to. It can be a standalone thing for a child. Dysgraphia has either a visual component like dyslexia, so they might see things slightly differently, or a spatial component to it like dyspraxia, or it could be a combination of both. It'll affect your spelling, and you might see the child having trouble with written expression, slow writing speed, inconsistent letter formation and spacing, and fatigue and discomfort when writing. Dyspraxia, which is also known as developmental coordination disorder, is a neurological disorder that will affect coordination and planning. And with these kids, we'll see poor motor coordination, difficulty with planning and sequencing, problems with balance and spatial awareness, speech and language issues, maybe poor hand-eye coordination. Often kids who have this might suck their thumb very late. They've got difficulty with organisation and memory and have a low muscle tone and fatigue.